Without further ado, the floor is yours, Dr. Hisham Alawi. And so, well, welcome again, and it's great to have you.
Thank you very much for Thank you very much for that warm introduction from Madam Director, for the warm welcome by Madam Nadine, and for your introduction, Stefan, and for the presence of all, and for the organizers. I am very honored to be here. I must apologize. I'm very happy to learn that these notes or these research in progress can be delivered in English, but I have to apologize for the fact I looked into the mirror and realized that my hair was out of control. Excuse me, but you know, I come to Science Po, as we would say in Berkeley, but with hair from Berkeley, so please bear with me. Yes, so I am looking at political economy through the lens or through the angle that Stefan, Professor Lacroix just articulated. And I'm a scholar of transition to democracy, and given the lull or the pause that there is in democratization, I was too depressed to look at authoritarian regimes, so I decided to see what sustains the status quo until the next revolt or the next breakthrough happens in the region, and hence decided to look at these things. In addition to being econometric and to being, as Professor Lacroix said, perhaps a bit too technical and technocratic, there is also the tendency to look at, to historicize in the longue durée, as we would say in French, political economy, and hence, as many would dub it, it has become for too long le marxisme pour bourgeois, as we'd say. So that these are two views of political economy I recognize exist out there, but mine is another one. We will go through these slides. The first ones will be faster because they synthesize the ills that you know are plaguing the region, and then we will devote more time to the novel and the more recent research and findings together, and hopefully we will have a debate about them. I am most privileged to have as the respondent, not discussant because he doesn't have a formal paper to look at and discuss, but the respondent being Professor Ishaq Diwan, who has a sharp eye and who has a trenchant analysis and will be able to enrich us with his insights. So as you know, the political sources of political instability in the region are very familiar to all, and they're very familiar certainly to most of you, and they basically can be summarized by this: political unrest, as in the Arab Spring, aftershocks, cannot be disentangled from the deeper economic problems. In many states, we know what plagues the region, namely stagnant education, high unemployment, systemic corruption, and so forth, and they all undermine political growth and regretfully nourish political exclusion. Violent conflicts, also very important in the region. They also basically destroy the social structure, decimate institutions, and traumatize generation. This is something particular to this region, to this neck of the woods, more than anywhere else. Moving on, as I said, a little bit more synthetically in the first slides, we can talk about rethinking the regional political economy. So in my sense, in my definition, or the definition I choose to retain today, is that political economy refers to how political constraints shape economic possibilities. Authoritarian regimes are perpetually worried about their survival. It is the raison d'être of any autocracy. Now, it's a raison d'être also for any elected government in a consolidated democracy, but it's a little bit different from authoritarian states, because authoritarian states and authoritarian incumbents think once they go, they cannot come back, or they risk essentially being put on trial and other problems. So rethinking economic reforms bring about the question of political costs, which incentivize autocrats to make unproductive choices. And by unproductive, I just do not mean suboptimal in the econometric sense, suboptimal can always be upgraded to a little better, even if they're not optimal. No, I'm talking about sometimes unproductive choices, which sometimes fly in the face of sane and sound economic rationale. And this is the most important, of course. This is the first bullet point that should be on top of them all. They hinder sustainable development. And the key question is here is sustainability. It's not the question if this trick or that trick works, if it delivers. The question is it sustainable in the long run? And yes, there are some autocratic regimes that are benign, that seek the benefits of the masses. But their policies, because they're based on survival, precisely exclude the masses. And they exclude the masses by benefiting to a small elite. I will move on here and I will categorize. It's my categorization. Of course, it's arbitrary and judgmental. Other scholars can categorize a region with different categories. Mine basically separates into three tiers. The first one is the rich countries of the Gulf, and they're the rentier states. Now, of course, within that, the first category, you also have the super rentier states that are Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Then you have the middle income countries which have excess labor, and they're Egypt, Iraq, Iran, Morocco, Algeria, Jordan, Tunisia, and Lebanon. I've included Iran, even if it's not formally part of the Arab world, but it's certainly part of the Middle East. And of course, lastly, there are, or at the bottom of the ladder, you have the poorest countries that are racked by conflict: Palestine, Libya, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Whether these countries are poor because it's due to the conflict, whether the conflict comes in first or the fact that they're almost failed states has created conflict is a matter of exploration for other research, but not specifically for this research. As I move on, this is a little bit the spectrum of GDP per capita distributed or aligned with different countries. And as you'll see, you have a country like Qatar or the UAE, basically, which are attaining those countries of OECD. Basically Western Europe and the United States and Canada. And there's a lot of variation, of course. And there is also very poor performance, Libya or Iraq or even Algeria, with the fact that these countries have important hydrocarbon resources and their economies are based on extraction. And precisely one of the problems is reliance on extraction. I will go to the common constraints. Now, this is the common story. And this is a very important synopsis of the contradictions and the pulls and push these regimes are confronted with. There's mass disenchantment with the Nasserist social contract, and that was the golden goose in the beginning of the 1950s. Everybody wanted to replicate Nasser, and few countries basically delivered on that model, with the exception of the Gulf and Morocco. The Gulf because it has the means to furnish subsidies from the cradle to the grave, and Morocco is because it never espoused that model. But apart from these countries, everybody got more or less stuck in this problematic until the failure of until the 1980s. Before the 1990s, the 1980s, we saw the crash of petroleum prices, and that whole model basically disentangled and evaporated. In the 1990s, we have the introduction of some certain neoliberal reforms. Now they are, structural adjustment, as you know, but afterwards, more than macroeconomic stabilization, the more policies pertaining to microeconomics, and they had to do with the so-called neoliberal reforms. Now, what's important to realize that this is a misnomer. This is an abuse of language. This is everything but neoliberal reforms. So they were basically centered around import substitution, but it is only those that had inside links to the regime that benefited from them. And ultimately, they failed. They failed at a time where concurrently with the fact that the state had removed many of its subsidies and social nets, and hence created a double crisis. High unemployment plagues the region. 2/3 of Arabs are under 30 years old, but the private sector job creation lags behind. In Saudi Arabia too, for a variety of other reasons. Political pressures to maintain unproductive state policies, such as low taxation and high military spending, that hinder long-term growth. Low taxation, why? Because people lose that confidence in the government and prefer going economically underground and staying in the gray zone. And the government, too, does not want to bring up that whole strata of economic development into the formal sector, because at the end it means taxation. And you know the saying, with taxation comes the demand for representation. Then you have, of course, fierce competition in mature global economy that penalizes the latecomers. A lot of countries are latecomers. There are even latecomers into the intensely labor markets. So the little section here on Saudi Arabia really explains, in a nutshell, with 4 statistics, the real problem, why it's crunch time in these countries, and especially Saudi Arabia. So 65% of the population is under 30. Imagine that. 65% of the population. That is, most of you in this room would belong to that segment of 65%. 63% of the population under 30 are unemployed. So it means that almost an overlap. Everybody in that segment is unemployed, or in the very least underemployed. 400,000 is the number of jobs that Saudi Arabia needs to create each year. 58% of the population under 30 have degrees. So half of that reservoir are people that have degrees and that feel that they are entitled to have a job. It's their right. Not only a human rights, but also a right because of the degree of proficiency they have and the degree of academic competence they have. So imagine the pressure any regime would be under in those circumstances. This is the intersection of political constraints and economic threats. So the problem comes with food security, and this has been exacerbated. It has started to appear with COVID, the rupture of the supply chains, and it has really come full-blown with the war in Ukraine, or shall I say, the special operation in Ukraine. It's not a war, it's a special operation. And you see the countries in blue are in countries that basically have a problem. People need to feed themselves, and there's a shortage of grain. And when you look at it closer, you say, well, Lord and behold, this doesn't come out of a vacuum. This is, again, an economic choice, not having invested in self-sufficiency in grain. This is, again, a choice for political survival. Why? Because all these regimes are in blue, basically followed the model of Nasser, and it was industrialized. We cannot stay agrarian because agrarian means we are underdeveloped, but if we are industrialized, that means we have propaganda. We are advanced. We are advancing, and we are en route to becoming like the West. And everybody, of course, was linked to the unique or to the dominant party, and as such, everybody in a certain way had that linkage, and everybody in a way was guaranteed subsidy, and hence was guaranteed food subsidies. And when you look at this graph, the only one that is, I wouldn't say not vulnerable, but less exposed is Morocco. And you say to yourself, what's so different about Morocco? Well, again, the decision about Morocco is politically motivated. It is, again, has to do with survival of the regime. If you all here are, some of you are interested in the Middle East and North Africa, read a book, seminal book by Rémi Levaux, I think it was called Le Fallah Marocain, Supporteur du Trône. It meant that the Moroccan throne or the Moroccan monarchy was supported by the Fallah. And as such, the Moroccan regime, or King Hassan more specifically, made that deliberate decision to not neglect agriculture. It turns out to have been a wise decision. But it's one decision out of many. Usually, authoritarian regimes, get it wrong. But this one, it was the luck of the draw. Or maybe vision, who knows? It's about historians. Historians will debate that. Now, on that, we move to the Gulf model. And, of course, there was a Gulf model since, but this is relatively, I'm talking about the new iteration of the Gulf model, the new model. This is a new model that came up, at the turn of the century. And before I go into these bullet points, let me just say what are the three conditions that basically helped or that triggered the bringing about of this new model. And the first, I would say, is a succession in these Middle East, in these Gulf states. And around the 2000, beginning of that turn of the century, you had a series of succession in Abu Dhabi, in Bahrain, in the United Arab Emirates, we talked about it, but also in Saudi Arabia and in Qatar. New leaders who saw that, at the end of the day, they wanted to base their legacy and their leadership on other modes of governance. The second backdrop condition, or the second factor, was the U.S. withdrawal from the region. The U.S. declared withdrawal from the region. Now, the U.S. did not withdraw or retreat from this region based on philanthropy. No. It had enough other faucets and other pipelines through which oil would flow in the world, and it had access to that oil. It didn't need the Middle East in the same way. And besides, it looked at China as being the new source of the new challenge, and as such wanted to stay relevant as the only hegemon or the premier power on the stage. This is why it withdrew. For these leaders in the region, America coming to defend them in the case of another adventure, like the Iraq's invasion in Kuwait, was becoming hypothetical. And hence, they had to step up to the plate and create a new model. Lastly, and it also, these come at the same time, was the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring explodes onto the scene on 2011. At the same time, all these factors come together, and the UAE and Saudi Arabia, because they see the possible democratization as a threat to their regimes, and they're thinking strategically, not normatively, it's realpolitik, as one would say in the field, decided to placate these democratic forces everywhere in the region. And as such, all these factors pushed them to become, or to think about new regimes that would project their power onto the region and onto the world stage. And this was economically and politically. Now, the globalized national economies in selective and capital-intensive sectors like the finance and logistics, all these countries, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, and Doha, sought to be economic hubs in the world. And in fact, they did everything also to join BRICS and other organizations above and beyond the usual perimeter or area of deployment, which was then the Arab world. And they also realized, and that comes with their new thinking, as they're all astute and well-versed into the imperatives of the new world, they realized that oil and hydrocarbons are a diminishing commodity. And as such, they had to prepare for a world beyond oil. Commercial mega project that transform urban centers and reconfigure public life. If you go into Doha or Abu Dhabi, you realize clearly that you are in something that's starting to look like Singapore, and in certain places even like Hong Kong. And so this is the drive to replicate and to compete with other thriving places. Now, cultural investments into social leisure such as sports, music, and art and luxury. And this flows directly from the diversification of away from oil. Because you're diversifying away from oil, you need to rationalize your economy, and as such, the subsidies are not the same anymore, and because the subsidies are decreasing, you have to offer your people a new social contract. And the new social contract is consumption and leisure. You have to be able to walk into these places and to think like you're in Paris or somewhere else. It is thought, or the rationale being, that this will essentially help facilitate the acceptance of this model. Now, how am I doing time-wise, Professor Lacroix? I'm okay?
You are absolutely fine. You have...
Thank you, sir.
10 minutes more at least? 10 minutes?
10 minutes? Boy. You'll give me 15, please.
Okay.
With your permission. Thank you.
We'll give you 15.
Okay. Thank you. So the Gulf model, as the slide says, the Gulf model cannot be exported to the rest of MENA for the simple reason because of the hydrocarbon factor. It is simply something specific to the region, sui generis, that cannot be pushed elsewhere. Now, a political paradox, most Gulf governments portray themselves as benign modernizers, but they also exclude masses from political participation. That's the most striking thing in these countries, is the incongruence between economic development and political participation. It existed elsewhere, of course, but to a lesser degree. That gap is wider here. And Gulf capitalist economic strategies are in reality based upon varying degrees of state control rather than pure market competition. When you look closer at this model, you see that this transition into a post-oil or into a new Gulf system has paradoxically, while it has sought to empower the private sector more, on the contrary, it has driven out the public sector, or rather, it has given extreme importance to the presence of the state in this project. And NEOM is the quintessential example of this. Let me move on. Now, internal and external contradictions with this model. The UAE is still in the process of national homogenization. At present, it remains largely centered upon partnership between Sparta, which is Abu Dhabi, and the Venice, which is Dubai. Now, Mohammed bin Zayed is the flag bearer of this new generation and of this new Gulf model, because he has come to power earlier than the other, or before the other powers. And he has had the vision, or if you are a Democrat here and you don't agree with that term, you can say the clairvoyance, or the political lucidity of seeing that there's a new game in town. And the new game in town is basically, you have to be on the move. You cannot only placate the Arab Spring and democratic forces without offering something new. You have to offer an alternative. And that alternative was basically projecting an image or a model of power elsewhere. And we see, hence, the attempts at intervening or weighing in the outcomes of a country like Libya and a country like Yemen. Whether it has worked or it has not worked is a matter of debate. Anyways, I think they have not worked, but at a minimum level, they have in fact derailed certain political projects that were underway. The second on board to join this is, of course, Mohammed bin Salman with his project on NEOM. Now, Mohammed bin Salman, or the Saudi gamble, will citizens in a large post-frontier society accept the logic of the market in return for social pleasures but no democracy? Mohammed bin Salman has a bigger problem than Abu Dhabi, because Mohammed bin Salman has demographics working against him, which is not the case of Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi will have high expenditures and huge demands on it, but it dwarfs anything Saudi Arabia will know. Saudi Arabia will know a lot of pressure. And hence, the project of Mohammed bin Salman is in a hurry. He is a man in a hurry. And the projects or his vision can be best encapsulated with the project of NEOM. NEOM is a city that resembles space or whatever, and it's going to basically be a new economy in which everything will be done differently. And this is the gambit of political, you will have renewable energy there, you will have futuristic projects, industrial stuff which is different. When you look at it, it's very hard to see what can actually work in the case of Saudi Arabia, except maybe for renewable energies, or I'm not a specialist, but other type of industries that work. But the point is, Mohammed bin Salman, with his hurry, he feels or has committed a deliberate effort to dissociate himself, to shun the existing bureaucracy of Saudi Arabia. And this is why he had to move NEOM outside. He had to create a new space, a new polity, a new city. It's basically divorcing himself spatially, geographically, and sociologically from the old Saudi Arabia, because the old Saudi Arabia, and especially the old bureaucracy, constitutes vestiges of obstruction. And so the Abu Dhabi model and the Saudi Arabian model are very different. Of course, we could add in another model here, and that's the model of Qatar. Now, Qatar has decided basically to play the mediator for the region, and hence to be more inclusive with everyone, and to play the role of mediator, and you see, to play a role more akin with the old model, more congruent with the old model, that of immersing with the old structures of solidarity, meaning the Arab world and the Islamic world. And hence, it has kept a lot of that national discourse, not just a language of politics, but a discourse of legitimation. And the question is, it has extracted a lot of soft power. The challenge for Sheikh Tamim is how to convert that soft power into assets. Soft power is always sexier, but it's difficult. It's more difficult to convert that in front of hard power or sharp power. The Abu Dhabi model is based on both hard power when you see interventions in the regions and sharp power too. So economic development at home enables aggressive intervention policies abroad that can aggravate crisis. Actually, you don't know which has come first. I don't think one has accentuated. Rather, they come together because they're the other side of the coin. They come together because, as I said, they tend to legitimize the political order. Economic challenges in other MENA states. I'll go again fast through this. Most MENA economies outside the Gulf face three convergent problems. High unemployment due to weak private sector, chronic debt due to overspending which aggravate dependency upon foreign and multilateral bailouts, and low capacity of state institutions which struggle to enforce rule of law and provide goods and services. That's the problem. Now, then we come to their new strategy, and that is economic segregation, or what I prefer to call economic dualism. Most non-Gulf regimes oversee segregated economies. And the choice of segregation is not fortuitous for them. Clearly, the new neoliberal policies have not worked. So the idea here is to make them work for a smaller portion of the population with the hopes that that segment of the population will lift the rest of society into development and prosperity. You see, it's a different logic. It's not just, you know, these are the people we like, these are the people we dislike, we don't care about them. No. We're going to see the people that are most endowed with the attributes and the qualifications to succeed. We're going to help them with the hopes that they become the levers or the fulcrums around which the rest of society is lifted. And these are essentially, then you have a bifurcation between the wealthy and educated elite and the masses, where the poor and middle-class households struggle to survive in an era of fiscal authority. And the ambitious scheme, like Egypt's new capital city, claims to upgrade the economy. Now, Sisi has another Neom. It's not Neom, it's different. It's basically a new Cairo. And here the logic with Sisi is very different than from Mohammed. People think it's similar, but it's not. While Mohammed bin Salman shuns the old bureaucracy, Sisi really fights the new bureaucracy. His line or his notion is that Egyptians are either minor, they don't know what's good for them, or they're lethargic, and in which case he's got to crack the whip so that development happens. And this development is based not so much on a futuristic project, it's based on a modern project, but it's based on a project that seeks its legitimacy in a putative past. We're going to look at the pharaohs. We're going to rejoin and reclaim our place from the time of the pharaohs. And Sisi thinks of himself anything but everything like a pharaoh. He never says it, but he's a pharaoh with huge intonations using or the use, sometimes agile, sometimes awkward, of Islamic discourse for legitimation. And this is very different. Now, one of the effects of this was it is not being dubious towards the bureaucracy. It is being, frankly, outright suspicious of the bureaucracy. And as hence, he has relied essentially on the military that have occupied, basically, that have replaced the bureaucracy. So the bureaucracy is out and the military are having more and more say in the economy while they do not have the expertise to do it. The result will be, it will hurt. How long will that happen? Nobody knows. But at the end of the day, this is a model that will unravel. Mohammed bin Salman's model is a gambit. This is a delusional, risky business. We move on to the barriers to growth in dualistic economies. Despite the abundance of human capital, these skills fail to ignite sustainable growth. You give me 5 minutes, please, sir? Thank you. These economic, I don't want him to treat me like Sisi, throw me in jail. So, these economic schemes fail to ignite sustainable growth due to widespread economic informality, due to weak rule of law, inconsistent property rights. That's the usual story everywhere. Low trust in government, reflecting the effects of political repression and systemic corruption. A weak private sector, as I said. The military have basically suffocated everyone else and have taken the center stage. Reliance on low productivity interests like tourism and construction. And here's something I would like to seek Professor Diwan's view on it. Looking around and looking at these models carefully, I have come to think and I've come to believe that economic industry and even tourism is really like hydrocarbons. It's a rent. And it's a rent that will give disservice to a country more than help it take off. Because I don't have the feeling or I have the conviction that revenue from tourism doesn't find its way laterally into the rest of the system. And sometimes I see it as producing the same ills as hydrocarbon extraction. Right? It can fill in the coffers, but beyond that, I think it thwarts real ingenuity and real enterprise. But Professor Diwan will tell us more about it. Now, Morocco has experienced some success. Again, I say relative success, but the old social contract between society and traditional political institutions obstructs the potential for economic creativity and innovative entrepreneurship. Now, not because it's my country, but Morocco is a bright spot. But it's a bright spot in this area, but that doesn't mean that it has the potential to break the impasse and to tackle the problematic we're talking about. In fact, if anything, I think even if there are progress, that problematic will not be resolved. It will still be there. That's my problem. That's my conviction. Now, when you look at Morocco, you'll find that there are pockets of excellence, whether in renewable energies, whether in telecommunications, or in even aerospace engineering or assembly. But I doubt, with the same social contract, that these pockets expand and become really levers of development. The fundamental problem remains the same, and that is the view that economic success on a mass scale is equivalent to dissidence, and it's threatening to the regime. And as such, I will echo, there's also another thinking, that another idea which Morocco has been working with. Recognizing the problem, the lack of social nets everywhere, and introducing legislation to create social nets that will bring everybody up into the formal sector, and as such, infuse the system, create this as an engine for productivity. The problem with this is again the same. When you have deficient or weak rule of law, you have problems of property taxes, you have the problem that comes about management, all sorts of problems we're talking about. So I think the Moroccan case has some positive aspects, but it doesn't have the potential to break that impasse. That means you can always improve, but as you improve, your problems get worse too. You have more inequalities, and you have more people in that bind. And as a researcher in Morocco called it, by the name of Najib Aqsbi, he called the Moroccan case as you have a glass ceiling. And I feel it's really very well exemplifies that example, because you have a glass ceiling for people and a glass ceiling for the government itself. It's keep running after a goal which is elusive. Now, beyond these paradigms, very quickly, and I'm wrapping up, literally, Professor Lacroix, please bear with me. You're going to give me 2 more minutes. Neither the Gulf model nor the Gulf segregation model are viable strategies in the long term. Autocrats do not want to economically awaken and mobilize the middle class capable of mounting another Arab Spring. So as we talk about bringing most of the people outside of informality, at the end of the day, when they look hard, they prefer relying on rents to finance this with budget deficits, rather than risking bringing or triggering demand for taxation and representation. So this is an inherent contradiction. Structural exclusion, inequality of existing models make future popular uprisings more likely. Not less likely, more likely. Now, when will it come is another issue. We can't predict this. I think we're not anymore in the cycle of biological generations. We're in political generations. It's not my father or my grandfather was in May '68, and then I'll one day become politically active afterwards. No, my older brother was there, and I've seen him. And my older brother now stayed home, but I'm going to take upon myself that task. So we are, I think, more in the logic of political generation. Now, literally the last slide. I see my neighbor in relief. Good. The status quo has created economic dualism, dividing MENA between cosmopolitan elites and restive, resulting in broad and discontent cycles. So I will go just to what is the last slide. So what is the solution? Now, the solution is linking political reform with economic reform, making them overlap. And the story here is that these are not structural problems. They are structural to authoritarian regimes and autocracy, but they are not structural to the contract. Even in Egypt, in the big mess it is, it can have a solution out. It will be difficult, but it can have a solution out. And the best example for this is Brazil. A transition, a political transition towards democracy has brought about, real, sustained, and a strong economy, an economy that has been able to be among the top 10 global economies in the world. Now, ladies and gentlemen, democracy is not a panacea. It's not a panacea for this. It is a sine qua non condition. It is the necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition, which is different. Only with real and genuine pluralism will you have accountability, will you have the possibility for rotations in power, for people to bring about their ideas of management to the forefront. It's only with genuine pluralism that everybody's going to feel he has a stake in the system, and it's going to release positive energies to bring about positive economic change. It's also with genuine pluralism that you give mandate continuously to more and more competent elites to run your bureaucracy, and that these bureaucracies do not become fiefdoms. Now, of course, there are problems with democracies. Democracies, when they come about, are messy. Messy because people have extraordinary demands in periods of freedom, and because at the same time productivity goes down and output comes down. So you have the juxtaposition of the two. And then as democracy starts to take root, you have elites see their places in power as ways to subsidize their continued staying in power. And that's the story of Tunisia. And this is why it regressed. So it's not sufficient, but it's a necessary condition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Alawee, for this engaged, erudite, stimulating presentation. And now the floor is to Professor Diwan.
Thank you.
Now, Professor,
it was also very
Professor
intense.
Diwan rips me apart.
No, I mean, this was also very intense. You must be very tired, intellectually, emotionally. It was so much content. I mean, I cannot rip you apart because, I mean, I find it so refreshing to hear about the Middle East in this different way. And this is really, Mr. Alawee, you represent in many ways the new school, the new way of looking at the Middle East that combines economics, politics, sociology, that's based on analysis, on figures, as opposed to simplistic ways. I mean, it's so refreshing not to hear the word Islam or Islamism once through the whole presentation, frankly. And so we're finding ways of getting much closer to the real tensions that are there in the ground, and understanding is really the beginning of finding solutions. And in many ways, it also represents the état d'âme of people in the region. I mean, the revolutions may not have succeeded, but people are much more connected. They have failures bring new expectations, a new will to change things. So we actually do have a region in transformation, and we see it through these slides, on the march to hopefully something better. And this kind of new analysis, uses words such as, or concepts, so, chronism in terms of state-business relations, clientelism, repression, dual economies, social mobility, grievances. So it's a new concept that combine to understand this region differently and differentially. We see three regions, not one region. We have the rich, we have the middle income, we have the failing state, which are middle income, sometimes middle oil that are falling. We have the drama of Gaza every morning to remind us of how hard it is to fall. So let me just say, make 3 points to take us to today, to the tensions of today. I think the central point you make is that politics is at the center, and autocrats are at the center, and they lead in a way, and it's their attempt at survival that defines what we get on the economy. So we have, on the one hand, young princes that used to be in a comfortable rentier environment where with carrots you could actually rule, but they have a big challenge now. We see the end of oil in 2050 if everything goes well, and so they have to diversify their economy, which is a huge transformation. So you talk of this new social contract that's needed. That's one, rising GCC, but still with challenges. And then you have the other countries, the middle-income countries that are moving to the periphery, where autocrats are very fragile now. They're even going through the end of a cycle that started with the uprising. We have financial crisis threatening everywhere. And so how would they survive? So let me take each one for 2 minutes and then have a thought about the road to democracy and the difficulty. So as we look at the GCC challenge, and this is something you will be looking at for the next few years, you have outlined the social challenge. I mean, the new social contract will have basically a Saudi, because really it's this Saudi Arabia is the real, the big bet here. The bet is to move to a social contract where instead of like your parents, you have your father in the administration, you study, you go into the administration, you are upper middle class, you live comfortably. Now the young people cannot work there, they have to work in the private sector. One income is not enough, the wife has to work as well. So it's harder, you pay taxes, goods are not subsidized, but you can go to the movies in the evening. You can even dance if you like. So there is much more social freedom, but there is no political freedom. So will this social contract hold? That's the big bet. But that's not the only bet. This bet is embedded in another bet, which is the economic bet. Can they transform an economy based on just extracting oil to a diversified economy that produces and exports things, goods and services? Big challenge. I mean, that you would need to have a bourgeoisie, perhaps, or what? Maybe they're trying to create state capitalism, a la China. We don't know. The model is being shaped. I mean, if you have a bourgeoisie, then you have a state-business relation. This is a new class. How would this new class relate to power? You may have followed the event of the Ritz-Carlton, where the richest people were literally put in jail because central power cannot accommodate easily to other more autonomous. So the second bet is to actually manage politically and economically to have a diversified economy. And that's a huge bet that we follow closely with huge investments, whether it's neon or other things. Are these white elephants? Are these good investments? But there's a third bet, which is the geopolitical bet. I mean, over time, you're selling oil to China, you're getting your weapons from the US, so you have to balance those relationships and try to sell oil all the way to 2050. Be the marginal producer. That's the bet. To maximize revenues, to use these trillions to diversify the economy. So there's a new geopolitical role, very crucial. You have to be a good citizen in the world, which probably means over time to be the guardian of the region and avoid failing states and all kinds of new responsibilities that will have to come. So it's a huge bet. The princes are young and ambitious and would only be 60 or 70 in 2050. But they have a huge bet, and they have trillions of dollars to achieve these bets. So it's going to be very interesting to watch. Now, a few words.
Will we be alive to watch?
We may, well, 2050 is not so far. If you keep jogging and staying in good shape, inshallah.
I need a hearing aid now, but I'm okay.
We can get that. So moving quickly to the middle income, to Egypt, Tunisia, Jordan, Morocco, the situation there is actually interesting, and the way you describe it is really interesting. I mean, these are not regimes, they're a regime interested in survival and not in maximizing the size of the economy. Actually, they'd rather have a big share of a small pie. A big pie is threatening. It gets all kinds of new forces that threaten them. And you give two beautiful examples. One is cronism. They'd like to control the private sector. And private investment is shrinking in all these countries, in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Jordan. It's very small. They're not comfortable with the private sector that they don't dominate. That's one example. The other example you give is education. And we've worked together on a book that you've edited on education. Education is indoctrination. It is not to help you analyze and have critical mind and innovate. So all this shrinks the pie for regime survival. Now, these regimes right now are in trouble because after the Arab Spring, they've spent a lot, they borrowed, and there was very cheap capital then, but now we are in a phase of higher interest rate, global fight against inflation, shocks with the Ukraine war, more expensive import of fuel and food, and tourism is down because of Gaza and other things. And so the macro situation is very difficult. And it's going to blow up. Lebanon blew up. 2 weeks ago, Egypt was blowing up. Tunisia is blowing up, and frankly, Jordan is not very far. Now, there was a lot of easy money, and easy money generates low pressure to reform, and easy money comes to help the autocrats stay in power because foreign powers are very comfortable with these autocrats. They defend against radicalism and Islamism, and the region stays friendly to Israel, and they now are policemen not letting refugees come to Europe. They play the game of Europe and the United States. And now what we see in Egypt is a big bailout. Normally, there's a big financial crisis. This cleans up the political system. We've seen that, say, in Turkey in 2000. It's a failure of the political system. You get the political renewal. Just a week ago or so, right? A big bailout package was announced by the UAE, the Emirates, for Egypt, $35 billion to buy 20 kilometers of pristine beach. And then the European Union followed up with $8 billion, and then the IMF added $5 billion. So, Egypt just got $50 billion, and that would be good enough for the very unproductive economy to live for another 2 to 3 years, and then we'll see, right? Interestingly, we are not seeing that mobilization for Tunisia. So maybe Tunisia will go through a creative crisis, and democracy will be back on the march there. So this is the situation in the middle income country. A last word on democracy, which is inspired by what you said. You said, I think, aspiring bourgeoisie and restive masses lead to cyclical revolutions. I found that quite inspiring. It reminded me of the autocratic paradox of Tocqueville. Tocqueville says that l'appétit vient en mangeant. As you're democratizing, the pressure to democratize becomes faster because the more freedom you see, the more you want, actually. And this doesn't seem to be working so far in the Middle East. And it seems to me it's because of aspiring bourgeoisie and restive masses division, the dualism that you're talking about. So in a way, we have an autocratic paradox as opposed to a democratic paradox. So when the economy is good, the young, middle class, educated young aspire for more. That's what we saw with the Arab Spring. But the masses are content because the economies are doing okay. They don't really mobilize. And so the revolution doesn't go all the way. And then when things are bad, the masses are unhappy. You know, there's not enough clientelism, not enough les gueux sort of rebel. But then the bourgeoisie gets frightened and goes back under the protection of the autocrats. Basically, that's what we see. This is what you've called the cyclical revolutions, right? So there is a revolution, and then the revolutionaries like call for Sisi to come and save them from the street. And so, you know, the key question I ask you is how is the region going to manage to go beyond this dualism and kind of unite, if you like, the forces for change?
Thank you, Professor Diwan. For this very rich discussion. Dr. Alawee, do you want to respond in 2 minutes? Because we'd really like to open the floor to the Q&A. So if there's any comment you want to make.
Well, up until now, these regimes have been able to survive or to manage their autocracies by putting in place, you know, hybrid regimes, essentially opening up just enough, but not allowing, but still controlling the playing field, so that they have always the advantage for incumbents. Playing just enough, also while being also hegemonic, because most of the key sectors were kept out of grasp from the opposition. A second and very important tool that they used, in addition to be able to absorb and deflect change, was using the Islamists as the boogeyman. The presence of Islamists in these limited races helped them basically threaten the middle class and saying, look, you will have radicals that are going to come and confiscate your rights, and threatening the West also with that, into supporting them. So that was the big cushion, was the Islamist movements. These Islamist movements cannot and will not satisfy that role anymore in the same way. So that alibi, they're being deprived from that alibi. Doesn't mean Islamism will end, no, on the contrary. It will have to exist, but in a reformulated way. So the next time around, I don't see those hybrid games played in the same way. And this is where the breakthrough can happen. Again, the challenge will have to be, again, mounted one more time, and before you'd have to wait for that new political generation to come online. Now people are traumatized, people are demoralized, broken spirits are much more difficult to mend than broken bones. And that's what's happened also. And at the same time, there's a lull. But that lull is temporary. Let's see how things will be put in place again. But the autocratic regime has less assets this time around than next time around, I think.
Thank you. You see, Professor Diwan, we had to say something about Islamism in the end. Still kind of came back to the discussion somehow.
Came back positively.
Positively, yes.
Divide and rule will not work anymore.
Exactly.
Thank you to both speakers. There's something you told me, Dr. Alawee, that I should mention and that I didn't. This will be part of research you're publishing in La Revue Pouvoir, right?
That's correct. This is ongoing research, which will be, I hope, will be published in Pouvoir in an upcoming number.
Right. So watch out for Pouvoir if you want to have the eventual result of this ongoing research. And now we can open the Q&A. I guess you have many questions. We have 2 mics on each side. And from what I understand, you have to queue behind the mics. Is that the way? So depending on which side of the room you're, you can just stand up and go to the mic. So if you're on the left, you have a mic on the left. If you're on the right, you have a mic on the right. Yes. You
Is it
want
working?
to start?
Oh,
Yeah, it seems to be working.
nice.
Please.
I have a lot of questions, but I'm not going to ask all of them. The main question I have is about your solution, the road to democracy solution. So you just said that the autocratic regimes do not have a lot in their possess to keep using and keep surviving. But let's look at the case of Iran recently and what happened with the Women Life Freedom movement. The scale of oppression was so extensive that it is discouraging, kind of, to keep mobilizing like that. It was one of the few moments post-1979 revolution that both these two segments of the society got out and start demanding some things, and more democracy, and at the same time economy. So Iran is a good case of this combination of economic suppression and democratic suppression. But this is a discouraging moment for this country, and I believe it can be said that it can happen in any other countries in the Middle East and in the Arab world. So how do you respond to that?
Thank you. We'll take maybe 2-3 questions so that you can, so maybe on that side.
Hello. Yeah, my question goes into a bit of a different direction, but basically I was wondering about the role of for example, the UN and other international actors in the development of the Middle East, because basically what you were saying is that most or a lot of the autocratic regimes don't even have a necessarily interest in bringing up the middle class to a more very economically developed status and have an interest in this dualism. So basically I was wondering, how does this, for example, from the UN efforts of development in that region, how does that fit into that? Is there even a point of having these development efforts without political change in the first place?
Thank you very much. And maybe one last.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sciences Po. My question is a broad question. It's very likely that Trump will be president again, though I don't want it to be so. With all due respect, the first place he went to was Saudi, and recently, since the massacre of the people of Palestine, there was some throwing around this question of, oh, maybe we should make a deal and give Saudi some nuclear opportunities. That's one thing. And so I don't know how much we can stop Trump. I spent 8 years at the UN. Nobody was really willing to try to stop him. And so the development question, the whole world is working on the development, sustainable development. And anyway, I'll just throw that in there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you want to take the last one? Or?
Oh, yeah, I can. You want me to
You can
take
take those. Probably you can take those, and then we'll have a second and a third round. So.
Yes. Very quickly, the story of Iran is not yet finished. Huh? It's yes, there's a cycle of violence and repression, but this is the third cycle that has happened. Some people tend to think that the Islamic Revolution is just knowing a crisis, and that it can, if somehow can be, if it opens up a little bit, it can accommodate for this. I think the Islamic Revolution is knowing an existential crisis. And the repression, I'll grant you, is very, very powerful and very strong. But the vitality of society is no less stronger. I've never seen a society in the region and anywhere else that has this strength to resist. It's absolutely inspiring and unbelievable. So this cycle is not finished. The regime has the upper hand now, but nobody can say where things will go. And nobody said that an autocratic regime will give itself, will give up power easily. Yes, the Mubarak regime has given up power easily, but the Mubarak regime was a geocratic regime of completely rotted elites that have basically known in full decay and going adrift. This is not the same case of this regime that has huge resources. And let's not forget, it may be a theocracy, but to what degree is it a military dictatorship too, given that the army of the Pastoran are behind the power? So this is an equation we have to look at more deeply, knowing that these things come and with a struggle. Now, the other question on the UN, will the UN and will more general multilateral efforts help democracy or encourage democracy in the region? I think that the democracy promotion business has taken a very bad rep in the world and especially in our area. How can we talk about democracy promotion when rule of law and international law is so blatantly violated by Israel that has a seat on the UN with the acquiescence of the entire Western community? Now, given that reality, given that despicable behavior, how can the citadels of democracy promote democracy in our region? Very dubious. I am not at all hopeful. Now, and better off, in fact, the democracy promotion of Mr. Bush in Iraq has, if anything, thwarted and dampened democracy. It had basically to take him leaving office for the Arab Spring to come. It would have never happened, even with his eloquent and strident and flamboyant speeches of him or Condoleezza Rice in Cairo. It didn't take because people knew what this was about. It was self-serving and interest-driven. And lastly, about Trump. Trump might win, he might lose, but please keep in mind that Trump is not the cause, but is a result of something. His populism is thriving elsewhere. It's thriving in Hungary. It was thriving in Brazil. It's thriving with the Modi government in India. And it's there because the liberal model of democracy has failed for a variety of historical reasons, because it hasn't delivered out of people. And the blatant or the most telling episode was the 2008 crisis in Wall Street and the economic meltdown. Who ended up paying the bill? It was not the bank and the fat cats of Wall Street. It was the ordinary taxpayer in the United States. That's the reason for the real populism in the United States. So Trump is a result, is not a cause. But that populism too will come to an end because it can't deliver. It's not the real thing. How long will it take? Who knows?
Thank you. Do you want to say it? Okay. Okay, so we'll take some more questions. Yes.
Thank you for your lecture. My first question is about Egypt. Do you think that if the interests and actions of Sisi and the military regime continue to not be aligned with the interests of the people, and the capital is physically moved away from the people, the economic situation continues to deteriorate, would that make another revolution inevitable? And on another note, some of these countries have very large diasporas. Do you think they have any role in building democratic foundations and institutions in their countries of origin? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
I'm interested in hearing both of our guests' answer to this. How do you define U.S. interest in the Middle East? Not historically, but today. Is it oil, defending Israel, democracy? I'm very interested in hearing your answers.
Thanks.
Bonsoir, je vais poser ma question en français, désolé. Je voulais vous poser une question par rapport au concept d'accountability dont vous avez parlé. Est-ce que vous pensez, avec une élite, pour le cas du Maroc, qui est industrieuse, mais qui et en quelque sorte se base sur une économie de rente parce que les entreprises ils vont rester dans cette zone grise et même dans le reste de la population il va avoir cette sensibilité à ne pas forcément rentrer dans... Enfin, ne pas payer tous ces impôts. Est-ce que vous pensez que c'est par rapport au fait que l'État ne garantit pas les services minimums qui pourraient laisser les personnes, on va dire, rentrer dans un système d'une zone verte au lieu d'une zone grise? Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Do you want to?
Yes, I'll take correct. Yeah, concerning Egypt. My colleague Ishaq Diwan has basically put the framework down. If the regime has 2 years bailout, has an oxygen of 2 years, and it was given a shot in the arm, not for nothing, it was given a shot on the arm as part of this counter-revolutionary effort to placate what Gulf actors, certain Gulf actors perceive as threat. These nations, or these Gulf nations, do not act like this because they're villains. They act like this because they perceive this as a threat. And they have also exposed themselves on the side of this regime beforehand. They can't risk losing now as the pushback may be even more costly. So how long will the bailout go on? That's something that we're going to have to figure out. Plus, this bailout, as Professor Diwan said, it's charades in multilateral effort because the IMF is part of the package, but the IMF is a decision from Washington. It's a decision from the West. It's not a decision from the board or whatever. Ultimately, it's a decision from Washington. And so the Gulf is hiding behind Washington, and Washington is hiding behind the Gulf with the idea that, look, we don't need an extra mess in the region now. But ultimately, there are no other solutions. Plus something else about the Egyptian regime. The Egyptian regime can be and will become very violent. It will become very violent because Sisi's project has elements of Italian fascism, you know, there. It's not about transforming the individual as a prototype totalitarian regime was, but it comes very close to that. Comes very close to that. And at the end of the day, my sense is that if push comes to shove, then the military will basically push Sisi aside and bring somebody else. And Sisi knows that the threat comes from the armed forces, comes from his military. Now, one last thing about U.S. interest. U.S. interest in the region, it's not about democracy. I don't think it's about democracy promotion. Yes, there are some people in power that can be very decent and principled, like Jimmy Carter, even like Obama. But at the end of the day, it's about geopolitical interests. And the geopolitical interests are the cause for Obama to have abandoned Mubarak. It's not the normative given. Oil. It's important for the United States to control, not to get oil at stable or at advantageous prices, because it has access to other oils and other reservoirs and other supplies of oil that have come online. But it's important geopolitically to control the faucet, because the faucet means whether China or Russia or other threatening countries that are challengers will get it at advantageous price. So it's an idea of controlling fluxes. That's the most important part in the equation for the United States. Now, it also has a big problem. It can't break the addiction it has to supporting the intransigence of Israel. And we're not talking about the security of Israel. I think the security of Israel, or the right of Israel to exist, is something that's more or less, you know, acquired and almost has been guaranteed for Israel. It's the intransigence of Israel, that it can do whatever it wants to do, that it can starve a whole population in Gaza, that it can bomb people indefinitely, commit human crimes, commit war crimes. I'm not saying necessarily genocide, because genocide is something that has to be proven in a court of law, and you have to prove intentionality. So these are important laws and important principles that we have to respect. But it's giving a blank check for Israel to do whatever it wants in Gaza. And that's a real thing that is tying the American hands. And at the same time, it's also creating a problem for the re-election of Biden, as you know, because for many people, this is a human rights issue. This is about the United States losing its humanity. So, yes, for the first time, the United States is in a bind about Gaza. But because precisely what's happening in Gaza, it will not, at this particular conjuncture, want to destabilize, I think, to destabilize Egypt, unless, of course, something dramatic happens. Now, the final question about accountability for elites in Morocco. Vous m'avez posé la question en français, je vous réponds en français. Quand je parlais d'accountability, je ne parlais pas d'accountability pour les acteurs économiques. C'est vrai que les acteurs économiques, pour des acteurs économiques, l'autonomie est importante. Et accountability est une partie de l'autonomie. Non, mais je parlais de la citoyenneté de manière générale. Un nouveau contrat qui nous permettrait d'aller vers une monarchie parlementaire. C'est de ça que je parlais. Si tout le monde, if there is an accountability, une séparation de pouvoir, là, le citoyen lambda peut se trouver à ce moment-là encouragé à être un acteur plus actif dans l'économie et accepter les aléas d'une économie. Ça descend, ça monte, et ne pas seulement accuser automatiquement le régime, mais de se dire qu'en définitive, qu'on aura la possibilité à de nouvelles élections, à donner un mandat à une nouvelle force politique qui viendra implémenter ce gouvernement. C'est dans ce sens que je voulais dire. Quoique, dans une économie plus grande et plus importante dans laquelle les élites joueront un rôle plus important, cette question d'accountability joue parce qu'elle donne aux acteurs économiques un embedded autonomy. J'utilise le mot embedded parce que c'est un concept qui a été élaboré par Peter Evans, je pense. Et c'est dans ce sens que je l'utilise aussi.
Merci beaucoup. Quelques mots?
Oui, deux petits mots rapides. Déjà, merci. Thank you for speaking so well about Gaza. This is also refreshing. In Paris, we don't hear honest opinions sufficiently, I think. So this is really refreshing. But just to finish on your rents, I think rents are really important. And to answer on Iran, I mean, in my book, which I think you should read, it's called The Political Economy of the Middle East, with Melanie Kamet. We have one other category, which is middle oil countries. These are the most dangerous and the hardest to change. You know, Iran, Iraq, Algeria. These are countries that don't have enough oil to distribute to everyone, but they have plenty of oil to finance a very tight security system and a closed circle, which is very hard to displace. For the other countries, and to come to the question on Egypt and on the UN, which I imagine is also about the World Bank and, you know, external donors, can they, you know, I don't think you can change a regime from the outside. It really has to come from the inside. We really had we had a consultation with civil society group recently about ways of changing. And you know, interestingly, right now, civil society groups don't believe in revolutions anymore. They think that change has to come gradually, that they have a role to play to come up with visions, with innovations, being bridges to new developments that would create momentum for change. That they have to find new ways to change gradually from within. So that's a different way, I think. So for example, civil society has an important role in monitoring disbursements by the World Bank, by the UN, and saying this is not good. You know, we don't want to bail out. You have to put conditions on this and that, and these institutions would listen to them.
Thank you so much. I'm glad Professor Diwan could speak about his book, which is the reference book on the political economies of the Middle East, and I think an important reference for many of you who are interested in the subject. So that's good that we had a chance to mention it. We'll take the last questions. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And we'll stop there. But we'll take these 5 questions, and then, you know, the challenge will be for Dr. Alawi and Professor Diwan to, you know, give a short response to these questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. I would like to thank Sciences Po for organizing this event. Dr. Alwi, thank you for coming and taking the road from the US. I would like to pick your brain on something. When I have discussions with my fellow Moroccans, we always discuss about political, and you have elucidated that economy and politics are inextricably linked. And one of the discussions, their argument they say, is that we are, as long as the economy is rolling, we don't need as much democracy. And they're talking about enlightened despotism. And I think you have written and researched about despotisme éclairé so much. So I would love to pick your brain on this and have your arguments about how we can democratize and still push economy for everyone, and being able to follow the democracy in these states with the economic progress and development, because they seem for some people to be quite different. So as long as we have an economic progress, we don't care if we have liberty and freedom, things that we judge necessary for any human emancipation. Thank you, Dr. Alou.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much. I have a question about the social inequalities in the MENA region. So there is one important reason that I think may explain these social inequalities, and that we don't often hear, is the spoken language in the country, which is the consequence of abandoned public institutions such as education. Indeed, we can see this in different countries like Morocco, of course, Algeria, Tunisia, or Lebanon. And my question is that will the elite class one day accept to put their children in a public school where they will mainly study in Arabic and not in French or in English, in order to promote social diversity and allow a son of a worker to be best friend with the son of a CEO of a big company? Indeed, will this elite class will be able to let aside their all their advantages and like accept this challenge? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bonsoir. Excuse-moi, je ne parle pas français. That's why I was speaking English. I have a question to both of you, especially to the external contradictions that were mentioned, that economics development at home enables aggressive interventionist abroad, and so instability, and also to the economic bet to deal with other states and diversification. I don't know if you're familiar with the DP World projects in the Gulf of Eden and the Red Sea, but they have caused some frictions in and around Djibouti. And my question is, what's the UAE's and the Gulf states' goal in the region around Djibouti and in Djibouti, and how to deal with the competitors like China? It's a little bit specific, but I hope you can answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and let's try to be quick for the last questions.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you very much for your intervention. My question is regarding the project the dualist economies have for the masses, because I thought it was interesting how...
Could you speak just a little louder? Remember, I'm going deaf.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how you said that in dualist economies, the government lets certain privileges to a certain part of society so that it can lift the others, whereas like since the model is separating these two like masses and then privileged classes, like I don't see how like the idea of lifting the masses. Can you expand more on this? Thank you.
Thank you. And then the last question.
Alors, bonjour. Je ne vais pas me risquer à poser une question en anglais ayant peur de mon accent. Alors, vous nous avez parlé à plusieurs fois d'un volet social, notamment d'une recomposition sociale. Je me demandais de quelle manière la question du changement climatique va influencer le changement sociétal. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Yes.
The floor is yours for the last set of responses.
Yes. Let me begin let me begin like the one with democracy and economic performance from my countrymen, from my Moroccan countrymen. The question when you pose the question to Moroccans, it's not so much about economic development and democracy, because that economic development for them in their mind is a kind of a given. The real question that they're reacting to, it's about order and disorder. If we're going to go down the democratic route, and we've seen that during the Arab Spring, that poses the question of instability. It poses the question of of the instability threatening our economic growth. And so posed in that questions, yes, most people, unless they understand the linkages very intimately, prefer the guarantee of a smooth economic development rather than instability, for which it has not been demonstrated that it's going to deliver. Remember, the Arab Spring is a question, is perhaps the only region in which the drivers of political change have stayed as observers. They have not transitioned into political parties that would lead that change. That's one of the reasons why the Arab Spring failed, is because all these youths stayed outside and watched observers, and they started looking as, as a supervisor and an observer to all these parties that already are part of the, of the establishment and of the system. So of course Moroccans are gonna react that way, and of course most are gonna react. Jordanians are gonna react that, except for the Tunisians, which have taken the path. Now, there is an illusion here, and this is an illusion which everybody is succumbing to, and even regimes are succumbing to. It's not necessarily a cynical, Machiavellic view. No, it's an illusion that, look, we can tweak this thing so that we can, resemble these East Asian tigers. And before the East Asian tigers, it was just the success of Tunisia or maybe Dubai. The problem is they will never replicate the East Asian tiger, because the East Asian tiger, it was a question of embedded autonomy, which these firms do not have in their respective economic settings. The region in East Asia was cordoned off to war and instability by the United States, and huge money was pumped into these economies, and they had countervailing powers of checks and balances, which had to do precisely with strong communist movements inside these countries, whether Indonesia, whether Korea, was so, and hence those systems provided checks and balances and a kind of accountability. It's not that the Koreans, South Koreans were less prone to cronyism than Moroccans or Tunisians. No, it's that they had a certain conjuncture, a kernel of economic and socioeconomic givens and parameters which had made them different. The fact that they were cordoned off geopolitically, the fact that they had these countervailing efforts, the fact that a lot of money has been, a lot of resources have been pumped in precisely into these countries for them to be a showpiece against Maoism, against Marxism, Leninism, that they've succeeded. And also, without falling into this essentializing culture, there is let's historicize it in a certain moment in time. Meritocracy was very important in this region, more so than in the rest of the world. Let's not essentialize this. And for all these variety of reasons, the role of Japan also, because of all sorts of the reasons, you had embedded autonomy to these firms. They could succeed. Let me end on that question just to tell you that there are two examples in our region of embedded autonomy. Aramco is an example of embedded autonomy. Aramco is a success story worldwide because the Saudi regime at that time did not have the means to run the petroleum sector, and it had its hands off, and Aramco became a success story. Even today, Aramco has patents in the field of plastics and petroleum engineering, which do not exist in the West. Another success stories of embedded autonomy is the Arab Bank in Jordan. The Jordanian regime had to lay off, because it was a Palestinian entity and it catered to Palestinian refugees, that it was a success story. So that reinforces my point. Lastly, but I want to come to this issue of education. Whether a more egalitarian education system can work. The problem is even those that find themselves in an economic precarious situation will starve themselves to death, literally, to have their children go into a private school. To show you that no one will sacrifice the future of his children for some, principled and very noble goal it is that would help beneficially outcome. But you have literally a collective action problem which is unsurmountable because it's highly emotional. And lastly, I don't know who talked about globalization at one point. The point is we are in a situation of deglobalization after 2008 crisis. And after all these crises, the state is back at the center of the equation. And there's a lot of deglobalization that is happening precisely due to the shortening of these supply chains on the economic field since COVID and since the Ukrainian war. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We need to finish because we have to leave the room. So join me in thanking Dr. Alwi and Professor Diwan for a wonderful exchange.